I don't know about y'all, but I really like a good pumpkin spice chai ice latte that I made right at home. It wasn't cheap necessarily because I had to buy the ingredients, but I did it, and I like doing it. And it gives me more control of my caffeine intake. So, knowing that I'm caffeinated, knowing that I got some water here to keep myself hydrated, which is at least one thing you might want to do today, keep yourself hydrated. I don't know if it's hot where you're at. It's kind of chilly where I'm at, but I'm glad to be here. I am Des the Mess. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them, and today we are jumping back into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, finishing off where we stopped, from where we stopped 2 weeks ago on the last episode, which was Bill's story. So I went ahead and marked where we left off, and when I say marked where we left off, I mean I put a bookmark in its place and then conveniently forgot and had to rewatch a portion of my old video to remember where I said, okay, this is a good stopping point. So I didn't actually mark where we left off. But this week, I'll make a note to do that if we stop in the middle of a chapter, which we won't probably have to do because we're finishing this chapter. But next time, if we finish in the middle of a chapter, I will write a note down or type it or what have you. So all of that being said, if you weren't here last week, I suggest you rewatch that, especially if you're trying to read along, because we do plan to go through the entire book. We talked about how Bill was in the military, and then he came home, and he had trouble getting and staying sober, and finally he felt like quicksand was surrounding him. And here we are, how he has reached the beginning of his last debauch, is how he puts it. So, as Bill tells it, let me get some caffeine again, and we can start right ahead. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. So right away, we're talking about some, I think, pretty typical alcoholic behavior, or addict behavior in general, which is knowing the person you love is kind of at their wit's end and doesn't want to see you using the substance, so you hide it in random places around your house that you will know where it is. I know people who've done that with, putting their drugs in floorboards or sections of the wall. In my case, one time in the past I was trying to quit. I gave all of my weed to my partner at the time, and I said, only give me this at certain times of the day, which we discussed. That way I wasn't smoking at all and I could cut back. And every time she did, I would wait till she went to the bathroom or otherwise left the room, and I would break a piece off and put it in a stash jar that she didn't know about, so that when she wasn't there, I would just smoke it anyway. Which is ridiculous, because if I was trying to actually quit in a meaningful way, I possibly could have, stuck to that routine, and I was unable. So I definitely feel what Bill feels trying to hide gin at the foot of his bed, hoping that he can get away with it once his wife is gone, and that she won't find it before they get to bed. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend, this is his friend Abby Thatcher, who got sober using that 6-step program that was available at the time, which heavily inspired Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to make a note of that and come back to it because, as I did with the last video, I forgot that I was coming to this section and forgot what it was called. So I didn't look it up. The cheery voice of an old school friend, Abby Thatcher, asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the fellow. He wasn't himself. "Come, what's all this about?" I queried. He looked straight at me. Simply, but smiling, he said, "I've got religion." I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer an alcoholic crackpot, now, I suspected, a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how 2 men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat, on still Sundays, way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings, his insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died, these recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. Well, as an atheist/Satanist, I actually kind of find that comforting because it means there's no plan, and the plan is I need to make a plan for my own life. I do appreciate the fact that Bill is admitting without saying it directly that he's agnostic, right? He's not really an atheist. It's like, I believe in something, I just don't know what it is. I can appreciate that because that's where a lot of people are if they're not devoted to a religion or a militant atheist or some kind. Typically, people are somewhere in the agnostic realm, right? Maybe they have an idea of what they think God is based on the religion of their parents or grandparents, but they're not 100% sold. There are a lot more atheists today, so obviously this line doesn't hold up that few of us really are, especially because back then, in the 20s, it would have been pretty radical for atheists to be very open about their beliefs or lack thereof. Nowadays, I can say I'm a Satanist on a vodcast, and I'll probably get flack for it, but I'm not likely to be oppressed because of that, specifically living in America. There are places in the world where being an atheist of any kind or not following a state religion in some places is trouble, and I understand that it is a huge privilege that I live in America where I can be a trans Satanist and not have a whole lot stopping me from doing that day to day. But yeah, the idea that the universe originated in a cipher, meaning like came out of nothingness and aimlessly rushes nowhere, yeah, that sounds alright by me. I don't want to say that I know for sure how the universe was created, but I'm pretty sure there's no reason it was other than just because. I look at everything as a chemical reaction, so yeah, that kind of makes sense, actually. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Yeah, we can study and prove these things. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay it all. If that purpose and rhythm is a chain reaction of chemical reactions and seeming randomness and chaos that forms into me being able to sit here on a YouTube vodcast and talk at you reading this book, yeah, Bill's right. There is a rhythm under it all. I just don't think that it's necessarily an intellectual or sentient thing that pre-programmed everything. So there's that. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. Again, the idea that there are, laws of physics and stuff like that, that's just what we can measure based on Earth. We have a very Earth-centric view of the universe and how it functions. And our laws of math and science and our theories don't necessarily hold up on other planets. I mean, when you take into the fact that a lot of this stuff relies on the gravitational pull of Earth, for instance, it's hard to say that these laws are immutable or exact. You know what I mean? That's why it's like Einstein's theory of relativity, because we can almost prove it, but there's still going to be a chance in the future that it will be proven wrong and a new theory will replace it. That's the whole point of science, right? Is that what I know today can be proven wrong tomorrow, and if I am a smart, critical thinker / science person, I'm going to accept that this new data has proven the current theory wrong. Where a lot of people get caught up is that they're like, well, this is what I knew when I grew up, and then after so many years, that idea of theirs that they had is proven wrong or obsolete in some way, and they're like, no, this is the way that I know it, and you're wrong. And when we dig our heels into ideas of the past and don't allow society to grow, specifically in a legal sense, because that's when it usually happens, right? A government of some kind will come in and be like, no, there is only two genders, or the earth is flat. I don't think any government has said the earth is flat, but there are people who are trying to prove that, and they prove themselves wrong when they actually perform experiments, so that's really funny too. But you get where I'm going with this, right? Is that when we try so hard to dig into what we know today as being the immutable truth, or proof somehow that God had a specific plan for that thing to be true right now as it was yesterday, when it gets proven wrong tomorrow, we have two options. Dig into our cognitive dissonance and be like, no, fuck that idea. I'm right because I believed in the thing that was true yesterday. Or say, wow, I guess I was wrong about that, or I could be wrong about that. And if we're a scientist, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to leave it up to actual scientists to do the work, but if I am a scientist, and I'm not, as I said, I might be like, hey, I want to make sure that that new theory holds up and try and reproduce the experiment or mathematics or whatever science involved to prove that this new theory holds up better than the one that was just proven to be false. And that should become the new norm if we live in a society that values truth over belief, right? That's where that is. There's a couple times in this book where they're going to refer to atheists believing in science. I don't really believe in science. I trust it. And I trust that most science is done in a nonpartisan sort of way, in an independent, critical review that means to explore the why of the universe and the how of the universe, and not prove that one thing or another is specifically true based on an individual's bias. There's obviously a much larger political discussion we could have that would detract from the entire point of the book here. But I just really feel like I need to say that this book does a lot of skeptics and atheists and agnostics, critical thinkers, it does us pretty dirty by insinuating that we're wrong because we don't believe in God or because we don't believe in some power of the universe. And I think that's really shitty, but I also understand that the 12-step program is built based off of the Judeo-Christian idea, specifically of God being the higher power. And even if they don't say it, they're borrowing so much from that it doesn't matter, right? Like, it's ingrained into the program. These are people who grew up in a time where Christianity was very specifically a normal, good thing that most people did. And when they started the program, it made sense for them to be like, oh yeah, I guess if I'm going to get sober, I should depend on God. And that God tended to take a Christian sort of appearance to them specifically. I see it in modern AA as people going to specifically become Christians in a church, and then they make their higher power Jesus, which again is all well and good if that's the path you are taking for your sobriety and you accept that other people have different paths and different definitions of higher power. Like, mine would be completely different because I'm a Satanist. But it becomes a problem when people get a pedestal about it and they go to a meeting and declare that if you don't believe in God or you don't believe in Jesus, there is no way you're going to get sober. Then you're making it worse for everybody, and you're going to hurt a lot of people who don't vibe with that. And they're going to get a salty taste in their mouth about what AA could do for them because you're demanding that they believe in your view. And that's super not okay. So this book has enabled theists specifically to become evangelists, even though there are things in this book that say we shouldn't preach or evangelize at people, specifically about AA. But I think in a general way, we shouldn't preach or evangelize at people. I'll never tell anyone you should be an atheist or you should be a Satanist. I'll just tell someone, read a book, right? If you're not sure about your own beliefs, read something. If you come to a different conclusion than the one you had yesterday, that's a sort of growth, right? Whatever that belief happens to be. If you end up being, kind of a violent extremist after the fact, I really question what you got from the book, or maybe the type of book you were reading that got you to that conclusion. But all in all, more often than not, it's better to read the book and get a better idea, or at least a different perspective that either changes your opinion as it currently is, or gives you a better understanding of something you didn't understand, or helps you grow into an entirely new person, right? That's the whole point of knowledge and science, is to continue to grow and progress as a person, as a group, as a community, as a society. Rant over. Let's get back to Bill telling us that the universe is pre-programmed here. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. Amen, Bill. When they talked of a God personal to me who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. Pretty fair, right? Like, Bill's the type of person, especially if he's been to war, who probably had a different idea that, of God. He's like, I'm not really an atheist, but how could God let this happen? If Bill isn't necessarily saying that there, but I could see how he maybe came to the conclusion that he's saying, like, the world's religions are pretty wrong, but there's gotta be something. That's fair, right? That's totally fair. People are allowed to think that and not impose it on other people. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him, his moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. Right there is exactly how I feel as a Satanist. Exactly that, right? I don't necessarily know or care or believe in the idea that Jesus was a human being. And if he was, I really couldn't think that he was the specific Son of God. Even if Jesus is being quoted correctly, and there's a lot of, rewriting of the Bible. And I don't want to get too sidetracked on this because we just had a pretty long rant earlier. But if Jesus was being quoted correctly, He said, I am the Son of Man, meaning I am just as equal to all of you. He didn't want to be a prophet, and the religion he was preaching about was love and kindness. And he said a lot of pretty radical, like socialist, progressive sort of things. So, yeah, I agree with Bill here that the character of Jesus Christ seems like a pretty decent guy in most of his portrayals. But I don't think that modern Christians, and he's seeing this in the 20s, right, and 30s, that Christians then were not really following Jesus as Jesus is described as being in the Bible, this radical, kind of communal guy traveling the world and preaching love. I don't see that much when I see an evangelist on a platform telling me I'm going to hell because I'm trans. Like, Jesus probably would have just hugged me and been like, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, if Jesus existed. And again, I'm not trying to get too sidetracked with that. But this whole section here is a weird roller coaster, because it starts off where Bill's like, man, those atheists and their silly lack of belief, and then but also, like, religion kind of sucks, even though Jesus seemed kind of cool. And I'm like, yeah, that's where I'm at, right? As a now ex-member of a religion who still identifies as a Satanist, for pretty much my entire life, I've thought Jesus was a pretty cool character who stood for good things, and most people have abused their identity as a Christian in order to oppress and offend other people, or try to force their lifestyle onto people that they disagree with, usually through the law, sometimes through AA, and that's really shitty. But the most satanic thing I can do is, as he said, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. That's what I've done with this AA program. I've taken everything that I can take out of it, and I'm going to disregard. And in this case, because of the nature of this vodcast, this series, I'm criticizing what needs to be changed and what's harmful and problematic. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man, a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. Well, Bill, I don't believe in a devil, but I really think Boss Universal is a super cool name for Satan. And also I understand, again, Bill, raised in this Judeo-Christian paradigm, seeing, like, the devil and being like, well, God's taken a back seat and the devil's taken over. I can understand that if he's seeing war and religion and crusade and all of this stuff as being evidence of God's absence, but still holding on to the hope that something underneath it all still can make sense. I empathize. I don't agree with every single thing he's saying here, but I understand. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all. This is, again, another part that I break from in AA philosophy, we'll say. The idea that I do not have power. Because if I didn't have power, I would not have sought help. I understand that there were situations and stipulations that put me into a position that kind of forced my hand a little bit more, but I still had the choice. I could have gone on living in my car and fucked off and, figured something else out, or gone on to die, essentially. I decided at, under no certain terms, I need help and I'm doing something seriously wrong with my life. And to me, that's the most powerful thing I could do as a Satanist. I was literally taking the vestiges of my will and directing it forward in a better direction. I was like, I can't fucking do drugs anymore. I wanted to try, right? I've relapsed twice, so I'm not perfect at this. But at that point, right, we're talking not specifically the day, like my original sober date, which was May 9th, 2018, but within the following week or so, right? Like going to a couple of AA meetings and meeting with a temporary sponsor that I had at the time. Having all of that stuff in my life made me realize I needed to do something better because I was running out of time and resources that would enable me to survive just living in my car. So knowing all of that, I gathered the power within me to make a phone call and go to a psych ward and transfer to a rehab. If I didn't have power, I would have just let life take over me, right? Like, I was at my most powerless when I was under the influence of drugs May 8th, right? Going tripping and driving around. That's complete powerlessness. I gave my power to the drugs and just let LSD take me literally on a joyride, right? Got behind the wheel of my car and was like, let's fucking drive around, because I was just going insane at that point. I had a psychosis. Like, I was tripping so hard I could not tell reality from the trip. I really did not know the difference. So I was powerless at that point. In the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had to become unmanageable. We admitted we were powerless, in my case, over drugs and alcohol, substances of any kind. I was powerless over them. I am when I start taking them again. And the reason why is because it flips that switch in my brain that's like, do it again. Just do it again. You did it once, it felt great, do it again. Even if it sucks. And it sucked both times that I relapsed. I didn't like doing it, and I kept doing it. So clearly, I'm powerless when I start engaging. I now have the power, right? I think of it kind of like, plugging in any sort of electronic device. I'm not giving it the power if I don't plug it in. I have the cord in my hand. I could, right? Like, I could plug it in and give it power, and then I guess that's kind of a weird metaphor because I still have my own power, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? If my addiction is the electronic device, let's say a DVD player, right? If my addiction is the DVD player and I never plug it in and I never use it, I have the power. I have control over the power that it would otherwise have on me. The second I plug it in, I'm watching movies. There's no reason not to once I plugged it in. I've just given up my power. I might as well keep doing it until I get miserable again. That's the whole point for me. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Weird. Here was something at work in my human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. This is another, again, really good example of agnosticism, right? Like, Bill isn't totally sure what he believes in. He's like, well, maybe there's got to be something, but I can't. When he's thinking of Czar of the Heavens, he's talking about Yahweh, the Judeo-Christian idea of God. And knowing that, it seems pretty clear to me that he he wanted something personal to him, right? The idea of a personal higher power. So my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" This, for me as a Satanist, is really huge, right? This is something they talk about in the third step, right? Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. The thing is, the word "as" has two working definitions. As means at the moment of, right? Like, this happens as this happens. They happen at the same time. Or it could be, that's just as it is. That is just the way that it is. So, turning my will over to the care of God as I understand Him. Well, God as I understand Him doesn't exist, right? It's just an idea, a theory about how the universe is put together. So for me to take that idea and run with it, well, okay, I don't have to turn my will and my life over to the care of a God, because my understanding of God is that there is no God. So therefore I can retain my will and my life and turn it over to the program, or turn it over to the community or my support system, people that care about me, because I don't have a God in my life. There's also as, right? Like the second, or I named it first, but the second definition, meaning at the moment of. God as I understand God. If I ever came to the sudden, Christianization, we'll say, that like, holy shit, God is running my life, then I would understand a person who comes to that conclusion turning their will and their life over to the care of God at the moment they understand God from their point of view. So even with both of those definitions, God as I understand God is just a theory for how the universe was put together and maybe continues to run. And God at the moment that I understand God is simply nothing, because it is an idea. So I don't have to turn my will and my life over to it. And Bill, right, why don't you choose your own conception of God, is what Ebby Thatcher says to Bill. Then he's like, holy shit, like I have all these weird ideas about religion and, maybe there's a spirit of the universe and all that stuff. So he says, that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So this is him coming to terms. I have this kind of highlighted too in the margins. You can see like over here, step 1 and 2 I have written there. And then like going down this side, each step basically that he's talking about. And he's doing all of that. Like he's describing his experience of the steps before the steps were a thing. Like, and knowing that as someone who, I'm exploring this book again, that's why I switched over to this one that's got my notes, because it's super important for me. Again, so Bill is having this idea that like, holy fuck, I can just choose my own idea of a higher power. And that's how easy it was for me as a Satanist to stop being bogged down with the word God, because I accept that God as a metaphor is just a theory or an idea for how the universe started and continues to run. And when I look at it that way, I'm a lot less discriminatory and I'm a lot less prejudiced, and I can face my own internal biases without being angry at other people. I'm not saying that someone who's an avowed atheist should sit through their trauma and suck it up, essentially, when they're at AA meetings, if they're just like, I really can't deal with all the God language. That's fine, right? For me, it just makes sense that I don't have to fight those people. I'm just like, wow, that was your experience, well, this is mine. Neither of us is correct, right? Like, there's There's no universal truth that's going to figure out which one of us had the real sober experience. But it's true for each of us, right? I have as much sobriety as I have today, right? I'm going on 3.5 years, right? I have that today because I didn't feel like I needed a religion or a theistic higher power, basically. I just used my ideas of Satanism and my current moral compass and, to an extent, my politics to then guide myself in a better direction. I realized if I stay sober, I'm more useful to myself and other people. And the things that I want to change in the world are more achievable from my little circle from which that I can control things, right? That little bit of control that I have, I'm able to do so better if I stop fucking up. That's it, right? Just as much as the guy in the AA meeting who's like, yeah, God gave me a better life. And that guy goes on to do volunteer and service work and make a better change in the world from his circle of control. If he and I are fighting for the same sort of things, I'm going to trust that that person has my best interests in mind. That doesn't mean I'm going to go to an AA meeting and level with someone who has fascist or theocratic ideas just because I level with people who believe in God. What I'm saying there is, if I see someone else putting in work to be a better person as much as I'm doing work to make myself a better person, and we are both using our progress to then make the world a better place, that person's on my team and I'm on theirs. And that's how I connect to other people in recovery, regardless of their belief. And I'm not saying it works for everybody, I'm just saying that's how I do it. And if you're someone who has a pluralistic view and has a very tolerant view and can talk to people of different faiths, good, right? But also don't take bullshit from evangelists and theocrats who literally want to erase your existence, because we shouldn't have to. Part of my recovery was recognizing I have boundaries, and part of my boundaries are recognizing that I don't want fascists in my life. And that includes theocrats who wouldn't name themselves that way, who show up in AA meetings. So when Bill is finding a power greater than himself, personal to his own experience, I'm going to level with him every fucking time, because that's what I had to do working the AA framework as a Satanist, as an atheist, as a trans person, as an anarchist socialist, all of that stuff. I found my own definition of higher power, and I worked with sponsors and a support system that also, they didn't believe in the same things, but they supported me for it. They were like, look, we don't have the same higher power, but we want the same things out of recovery. And some of us want the same things out of life in general, or out of society. And that's it. That's it for me. Thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. Check. Not happening. At long last I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. So this section here, right, the three paragraphs we just read were steps 1 and 2, right? Admitted we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. Bill's recognizing, I can't fucking do this anymore. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. He now had a better understanding of his own idea of God and put himself in the hospital to get alcoholic treatment for the final time. After this, and I'm going to go off of his story, and I don't think he's relapsed since, but out of this, right, that was it for him. He was like, fuck, like, I now have an idea of a power greater than myself, which for him, he's going to use the word God to describe those things, as he said, creative intelligence, universal mind, spirit of nature. That was his coming to moment. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, step 3. to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I don't agree with Bill there, again, because even for me, I have to remember I'm speaking from my experience. For me to think that, like, I'm nothing without a higher power in my life, I'm not giving myself enough credit for the work that I've put in to get myself to this point. But also, I know people who believe in God, who have gone through the program, who don't think of themselves as totally nothing. This book has a very warped idea of what humility is. A lot of people think that in order to be humble, you have to be lowly and kind of like not think much of yourself. Humility is just the balancing. You think, I am neither the shit nor total shit. I just am. I am who I am. I usually accept all of my flaws as much as my talents. I am where I am, and I just am who I am, day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. To me, that's true humility. I will never say I'm humble, because that's like the awareness of it is kind of arrogant. But I like to think that I act in a way that is more humble by recognizing I'm not really that good or bad. I just kind of am where I'm at. And so I don't agree with, I'm nothing without God. I'm absolutely nothing. You're not giving yourself enough credit, Bill. You went through all of this hell to get to the point that your friend convinces you to get some help in rehab. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend capitalized because he's talking about God, take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. So that last paragraph is essentially steps 3 through 7, right? 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked him to remove these shortcomings. That's what he's talking about. All of those steps, 3 through 7, right? He came to his idea of God. He wrote down his list of grievances and wrongdoings. He shared them with his friend, and he started recognizing where he could do better, right? Recognizing his shortcomings and what he would call character defects, and then, humbly asking God and the help of his community to help him alleviate those things. That's steps 3 through 7. 8 and 9, my schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. 8, made a list of all people we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. That's step 8. That's what he's doing right there. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitted my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Step 9, made direct amends where possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So that's my caveat with step 9, that some people, go back to your abuser and apologize for the resentment you have and forgive them for abusing you. Don't do that. Don't do that if that's something that's beyond your capacity. Go back to that person you abused and tell them you're sober and that you want to apologize to them. Case by case basis. If you hurt somebody and you think there's a reasonable... I want to be careful because I don't want anyone to use that as like a get out of jail free card for like, if you're taking this program seriously, do as much as you can of your amends. But also recognize if reaching out to someone that you hurt might fuck you both up more for, rekindling the trauma. Like, you don't want to, that's the whole, unless doing so would injure them, right? You don't want to injure the person you're making amends with or others. I'm an other, okay? Like, in that wording, it doesn't say injure myself, but I'm counting myself as an other. If I go to someone and make amends and directly implicate someone else in the process, I'm injuring someone else, even if I made it right by the person I specifically harmed. You know, like if I cheated on someone and I go to that person and be like, I'm sorry that that we had an affair, and that their partner doesn't know that we had an affair. I'm now injuring their partner. That's for those two to figure out, but that's between me and the person I'm apologizing to figure out a healthy way to not injure them or others. I don't want to fuck up someone else's relationship for apologizing for something. And I've never had an affair, I'm just using that as an example. But also, I've hurt someone pretty bad before. I don't know if it's healthy for me to call or message that person on Facebook and be like, hey, I'm sober now, and I don't know if you realize this. And I'm not doing that because I don't want to re-traumatize them or bring up all the feelings I'm still working on. I have a lot on my own plate. I have to work at this at my own level. And I think in that way, it's better to make what they would call a living amends, right? And I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to act that way anymore. I'm going to do my best to stay sober and be on the right side of history from now on. And in doing that, I'm making a living amends. I don't have to re-traumatize them or myself in order to make it right. I just have to accept that this is a thing that happened. And I'm sure a lot of people who have had a history of drugs and alcohol, or specifically drug and alcohol and substance misuse at large, have hurt someone in such a way they're like, man, I really can't talk to that person. Like, it's just not healthy. Don't re-traumatize yourself. Don't re-traumatize others. Except when to do so would injure them or others. I am other. People around the person that I initially hurt are other. I'm not going to injure myself to say, to make an apology. I'm not going to do it. And I don't think anybody else really should either. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. This is step 10. Drawing a blank here, so I'm going to pull out the other big book. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. This is step 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, consciously admitted it. I forgot what it was for a second, so I looked it up. I was to sit quietly, when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as He, meaning God, would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry that out. Yeah, I remembered it. Praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry that out. So me, as a Satanist, I enjoy meditation. I've tried prayer. I think it's goofy and doesn't really work. It's good for setting intentions. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying figure out something that does work. I'm never going to tell someone, if I was sponsoring, and I've sponsored in the past, I ask people that, what is your relationship like with religion or the idea of God? What does all that mean to you? Do you pray? Is that something you find useful? Do you think you would find it useful? Try it out. If it doesn't work, we can find something else. I want tools in my toolbox, and I want to be able to share those tools with someone else. I'm never going to say, do something that I wouldn't do. I'm never going to tell someone else not to do something that I think is useful for me unless they find it's not working for them, and then we can find a new solution. So in this case, he's just, again, we're just going through the steps here. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Having had, step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of our steps. See, I messed it up again. Step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And something I'm going to say that is contentious and has also caused me some grief in the past when I was more active in AA is not everyone will live by these principles, or at least not the way that I understand them. And it's not my job to take their inventory. I have to take mine. There are good examples and there are good bad examples. And people who aren't living in according to these principles, I'm going to just be critical of, usually in my mind. I've said some stuff out loud and not made friends about it. But the point I'm trying to make here is if Bill is going through the steps, like as he's talking about it, basically, before the steps were written. So that's what that is. Simple but not easy. That's actually one of my favorite things out of all AA. Simple but not easy. The idea of like just stay sober, go to meetings, call somebody. That's really simple. It is not always easy, right? Simple is someone giving you the directions. I'm using this example because a very wise old man told me this. Simple is being given the directions. Move all of these heavy boulders from the front yard to the backyard. It's not easy work, but it is simple. Very simple task. Move boulders to the backyard. It's not easy because of all the work that gets involved into moving those heavy boulders. My recovery is simple. It has not been easy, and it is not always easy, and it will never always be easy. It just is. It's a simple concept that if I stay sober and call someone when I feel like I'm in trouble, I have a much better chance of having a better day tomorrow. That's all that is. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of Light who presides over us all. Again, Bill here is now having this more Christian idea, right? Even though he has a personal higher power, he's just revisiting his former, basically his Judeo-Christian idea of God. And that's what that is to him. Those were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I finally accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up, as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. Again, he's having this moment. He's talking about... This jumped quite a timeline in the last page. He talks about how he's sitting at the table with his friend, drinking gin, and his friend's like, look, man, I found God and got sober, started to figure it out, right? Ebby Thatcher's like, I want you to have a chance at this too. And Bill goes to rehab. So the last several, I'm going to assume months, right? It could have been a couple weeks, but he probably did this over a couple of months. Worked through essentially what the steps were. But he's coming to all of these terms. So for him, his idea of God just kind of morphed into the Judeo-Christian God, right? Father of Light, that whole thing. For a moment, I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were. The good doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences. He knows that they are real. This is what I was talking about, in that there's no universal truth to a person's experience in recovery. So it's not that I believe in someone else's God when they say God got me sober. I would like to believe that they're a better person today, and their faith or their belief in whatever their higher power is helped them to achieve that. That's what Bill's talking about when his doctor's like, yeah, something good happened and I'm glad that you're better than you were. That doctor might have been an atheist, and Bill was just like, I found God and I'm sober and I'm starting to do better. It's like, okay, that doesn't mean God made him better from, in a scientific sort of view. That doesn't mean God is what made him better. It just means both things, right? Both things happened at the same time. He started to recover and he found God. And using those two things, he continued to recover and become a better person. So I look at that when I'm in the AA meeting and someone is talking about their experience with God. I'm not going to be like, no, you're wrong, God doesn't exist, because that makes me an asshole. I'm not trying to go out of my way to disprove someone else's experiences in recovery. I want to know that regardless of if they believe in God, and hopefully if they don't, there's someone I can connect with even more, right? But like if they do, I can still connect with them because we have a shared experience in recovery regardless of our individual beliefs or lack thereof. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others. That's what they call 12th step work, right? The idea that's like, I got sober, you have to give it away to keep it, right? In order for me to continue staying sober, or the typical model of recovery, in order for me to continue living a decent life, is to extend that support onto other people. How can I help someone else find what recovery works for them? By giving away what it is I have learned. That's why I'm doing this as a vodcast, so I can dissect the big book and say, look, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't, and this is what could work for you. And if it does, if you're getting anything out of this, great. That's the whole point, and that's why I'm continuing to do it. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Step 12, we said it before. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. They're talking about sponsorship. They don't name it sponsorship in this book because it was written before the concept of a sponsor was there. They'll call it something later, and we'll get to that. But that's what they're talking about, is going out and saying like, hey, look, I worked this program and this is how I got sober. I want to help you get there too. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. Here's a caveat, right? So that quote is a bit misleading because it's saying, let me get my Eliphas Levi book. So when Bill is talking about this, when he says faith without works is dead, that's a paraphrased quote from our friend Eliphas Levi, who wrote a bunch of different alchemical, philosophical, and theosophical works and rituals and stuff. So I'm gonna read from that book as an aside. By intelligence, man conceives the ideal of God, and by will he should turn to good works. But human will, when without works, is dead, or at any rate is only a vague desire. The same is true of a thought not expressed in language. It is not a word, but only a dream of the intelligence. An imagination is not a realized thing. It is only a promised something, while an act is a reality. For the same reason, there is no piety without prayer, and no religion without worship. Words are the formal and social reality of ideals, and ceremonies are religion put into practice. There is no real faith unless it shows itself by actions prompted by faith. A formulated expression in words, confirmed by actions, demonstrates the two powers of a human soul. To work it is necessary to will, and to will it is necessary to formulate the desire. Actions imply ideas, even if the ideals are not themselves translated into acts. Thought is the life of intelligence. Words show the creative force of thought, while actions are the last effort of words and the desirable complement of words. Words have been spoken, thought has been translated into action. By the act of creating, speech has taken place. I'm not going to continue reading because it does go on for a bit, but the point of that is, when they say faith without works is dead, it's like they're crunching it down, okay? Eliphas Levi was basically saying you can have faith and you need to work on it, right? If I have the idea and I never speak it, I might never do it. That's the whole thing, right? So he's saying if you have an idea of faith and you're not talking about it, and then you don't turn that thought turns into word turns into action because you're planning it, that sort of thing. That's what he's saying, and they're just crunching it down. Faith without works is dead. He's not quite saying that. He's basically saying if you're not putting in the effort, you might as well not do it, right? Like, you're either doing it or you're doing it. I love that because really hits home for me as someone who practices ritual and likes exploring occultism, because the idea is if I continue to practice the principles, which is the AA thing here, right? Practice these principles in all our affairs. That's what he's talking about. So you can now see how AA has taken some occult philosophy, knowingly or not, borrowed it from a pretty obscure text, right? The magical ritual of the Sanctum Regnum. Like that, the fact that there are words in that come up in this is pretty interesting to me, and it's why I like AA, because to me, this is an alchemical work. I'm taking one thing, which was my addictive personality and all of the, terrible traits that came with that, and turning it into something else. I'm turning copper, right, into gold, essentially. Taking that old me who I used to be and turning it into something better. That's alchemical. That is a philosophy of alchemy. I'm not going to get sidetracked on that, but you can understand why I really like AA for the way that it works. Recovery programs in general kind of run on an alchemical sort of force. The idea that I'm taking the bad and turning it into something good. Boom. That's alchemy. I'm literally... It's an alchemical philosophy. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. This is what I was talking about when I say that reaching out to other people and also giving back when I can to the community is so important for me, because without that, I might as well not be doing it. I'm allowing self-centeredness back into my life. When I start becoming selfish and self-centered in a negative way, like, I'm not saying I'm closer to using drugs and alcohol, but I'm closer than I was, right? Because then I'm alienating. Well, I don't need to help you because I got all the help that I need. That's selfish. That's super selfish. If someone calls me at whatever time, I'm going to call them back and be like, hey, what's going on? In a recovery context, right? I'm not always going to answer my phone because I'm antisocial. But the point is, if someone really needs help and they reach out to me, I always reach out to them. And even if I can't specifically help them in that instant, I want them to know that I'm supporting them in whatever way that I can. And I think that's super important. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. So I have a lot of this stuff here highlighted, right? I mean, this is most of where I start to agree with Bill to an extent about the idea that me keeping the principles of my Satanism alongside the program of AA was vital to me becoming a better person, right? Like, and then trying to, I don't want to say impress that upon other people. Like, hey, I'm showing you compassion and empathy. I want to struggle for the justice that you deserve in getting recovery. That sort of thing. I'm paraphrasing a lot there, and you can tell, but that's the whole point. I'm taking my personal beliefs and principles as my form of higher power and then putting that to work in my recovery to hopefully help someone else help themselves. My wife and I abandon ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Again, the economy was a bit different back then too, so take all of that with a grain of salt. But when I think of this, it makes me think about the times where I was really struggling and I reached out to do something for someone else, right? Like, I don't always have the emotional or financial resources to just help someone all the time. But when I'm struggling, I kind of end up with a second wind where I'm like, man, I just need to focus on something else besides the problems that I'm having. And then in doing so, it makes me feel better. And sometimes in doing that sort of work, especially if it was like at an AA meeting specifically, if I'm volunteering or whatever, the point is, by doing that, I might end up talking to someone who can help me figure out my situation a little bit better because I've now opened the door. When I stop wanting to work with others, and it's not saying necessarily work for others, working with them. Someone who needs my help will help the next person, just as when I need help, someone will be behind me to show me that. It's, one hand washes the other sort of thing. If we're all washing the hand next to ours, that's the circle of recovery, in my opinion. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. So again, Bill here is talking about how when he was struggling, he would go to the hospital where he stayed to find out if there were other alcoholics. That's what they did a lot in the early times of AA. Is he would... they, like the group in general, would go to hospitals, psych wards, sanitariums, that sort of stuff. And they would ask about people who are struggling with alcoholism. Be like, look, we found a way out of this and we want to help you. No strings attached, no money involved. Just all you got to do is talk to us and help us figure out how to help you. And that worked. That's how they ended up with the first 100 people in AA that ended up, forming the groups in Cleveland and Akron and writing the big book because of that work that they did of actually going out into the field. So there was a lot of, I'll call it mission work, because that's basically what it was, of trying to recruit alcoholics and drug addicts into the program for a chance at a better life. We commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. I was just talking about that. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one western city, they're talking about Cleveland, Ohio, and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. There's an asterisk here because this is the 4th edition. It says, in 2017, AA is composed of approximately 118,305 groups. If you think about the fact that the average AA meeting has about 15 people and multiply that, that means that there, at any time, are over a million and a half, we'll say, AAs, like people in recovery, specifically AA. I'm probably ballparking at 15 because it seems like that's a lot of the meetings I've gone to, between 15 and 20. Regardless, right, you're looking at a known or a guesstimated population in 2017 of between 1.5 million to 2 million people who identify as AA members, even anonymously. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. That is a tragic fact. For whatever reason, that person didn't get it. That goes back to what I said on the last video. People will die. This recovery in general is not a joke, and it's really hard when people within recovery groups are pushing the envelope on others. I'm not saying that's what happened here, right? This is a story from almost 100 years ago. No way to tell. No way to tell why that person was struggling. They just did, and they couldn't do it, and that's what but it's a reality. Some people are really just like, I can't do this, and their only way out is that way. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. And again, their faith is in their higher power, whatever that is. In Bill's case, it was his Father of Light, or Spirit of the Universe, and all that stuff. Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co-founder of AA, died January 24th, 1971. Fun fact about Bill W., and it's contested, and some people don't like talking about this, is on his deathbed, he asked for a drink, and everyone around him was like, how dare you? I don't blame you, Bill. I really don't, because I might ask for one too if I knew I was going out. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that is what it is. I don't want to say it's funny, but it is in a kind of macabre sort of way. But yeah, I struggle with Bill's story because the first half is really boring, and he's got some parts that are loaded about atheists and stuff, and like how could you not see that the world has an underlying system to it all? Like, I do. I just don't believe that a God put it there, right? And like, science just tries to get closer and closer to the truth and might not ever actually know what the truth is. That's all that is for me. The second half of Bill's story I relate to more as someone who's gone through the program, who's worked the steps multiple times, and who's relapsed a few times. I can find his story boring and kind of drone on a little bit, and also find really good stuff in it because it's relevant to me and because I had the time, and now I understand what it's like to constantly struggle, right? Like, the first time I started smoking again and didn't tell anybody, I felt that, right? When he said he was at the bar beating his fist on the, and like, how did this happen? That's where I was at. I was like, fuck, I'm on probation. I'm living in a sober house. I'm going to get kicked out. Like, how did I let this happen? I just quit my job because I stopped showing up. And then I had to live with a friend that was a whole nother situation. But the point here is, I relate to Bill's story even if I find it boring, and I can still find good things in it. The second half I relate to more because of the program aspects of it, and because I'm now taking a more critical, outside of AA look at it. Whatever, the good stuff that I find in there is good stuff. The rest I'm going to be critical of. It's going to be the same as it was in this chapter as it will be moving forward. And I hope that if you're watching or listening along to this series, that you get the same sort of love that I do out of it, or just maybe a new perspective. Maybe there's something in the book that you didn't really consider, and me rereading it and kind of giving this, talk about it opens it up a little bit more. I don't know. I'm just going to keep doing this. I like doing it. It's fun. I don't do it for... I do it for free, I should say. So if you want to throw me a couple bucks... it's not hard work, right? It is simple work. I would say it's medium. It's not really easy. Reading and talking about all this and making sure I set time, every week to record. It's fun and it's simple, and I like doing it, and other people seem to be receptive to it. We'll revisit this series again in 2 weeks. Stay tuned next week if you're following along my exploration of the lore and politics of the Insane Clown Posse. That series is continuing to go just as much as this one. This one will probably be longer because of the nature of the book being what it is. But yeah, so we are already on the official chapter 2, right? There is a solution. So yeah, if you're reading along with us, we're going to start next time on Chapter 2, page 17. I've got a lot of highlights. I like this chapter. I don't know if I love it. I'll remember as we pick it back up. And yeah, all that being said, all my links are going to be below. I'll post the link to that group I can't remember the name of below, their Wikipedia article or whatever. And yeah, follow all my social medias. Comment below. Let me know what you think. If you liked it, if you disliked it, what good you took out of it, what's something I missed, or something you want to see talked about more. You know, like, seriously, reach out to me. I want this to be a very community-driven sort of channel. And I like the idea of having discussions about this stuff. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't. I don't want to just sit here and monologue at people. I know it's kind of what I'm doing, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, discussion is key, and we all grow by talking about it. So yeah, comment, message, whatever. Follow me on all the socials. Throw me a couple bucks. I've got my links below. And yeah, all of that being said, like, follow, subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening along, check in another 2 weeks, and we'll have the next episode up. Until then, y'all have a great weekend, and I'll see you around.